Welcome to the Fintech Times News and Views podcast. Established in 2016, the Fintech Times is a global multimedia news outlet centered around the world's first leading fintech newspaper. We report on the latest and brightest ideas from the fintech world. Follow the conversation using hashtag TFD News and Views and follow us at the Fintech Times.
Hello and welcome back to the Fintech Times News and Views podcast. We are continuing our theme this week of being a man down. In fact, this week we're a woman down because we sadly don't have Polly directing us for this episode. But Francis, you are back with us this week. So how are you and how's your week been?
I'm in much better health than I was last week. Unfortunately, I was extremely unwell and talking, breathing, sort of everything that you'd expect to be able to do was just a massive chore. So luckily, my health is back in good shape now and looking forward to the conversation that we've got today.
Yeah, I'm very glad you're back well and with us. That way I'm not alone this week. And with that in mind, what news are you bringing to the table today?
So this week I'm going to be talking about Cheddar and how it has expanded its app to offer accurate insights into spending habits.
Interesting. And I am going to be talking about a new study from trading and investment platform eToro about who actually harbours the responsibility to educate consumers about their finances. But as I'm hosting this week, why don't you go first with your news?
Yeah, absolutely. So this week, UK-based finance app Cheddar has launched its free spend tracker, a tool created to help users deepen their insights into their spending habits and give them more control over their financial health. So Cheddar hopes that the new spend tracker feature will enable users to make better financial decisions while simultaneously earning cash back. The fintech explained that the tool boasts 98% precision in categorizing transactions, offering users more tangible insights into their spending. It also explained that many existing apps often have poor categorization accuracy, with transactions falling into general or other. These apps sometimes charge for simple features, making financial management more cumbersome, really, than doing what they're supposed to do, which is ultimately make them more accessible, simple, and easy to use. The reason this really stood out to me was because there was a stat at the end of the article which, really stood out to me, and it was from KPMG, and it revealed that 41% of UK consumers feel less financially secure heading into 2024 compared to the previous year. Additionally, 58% of respondents plan to cut back on non-essential spending to manage their finances better. So Cheddar, with its new free spending tracker, will be able to address this need and enable users to manage their money and plan for a secure financial future. So one of the big things that I wanted to discuss with you today really is, this isn't something new, obviously. We've seen a lot of organizations talk about spending trackers and sort of financial management platforms and how they all really set out to do the same thing, which is to help make users more aware of where they're spending the money and where they can save money equally. And I just found it really interesting because on the surface, and the idea behind it is great, but when it actually comes down to it, when I look to see where I'm spending my money, I'll probably look at my bank statement and see, I've spent some money here, here, and here, but it isn't categorized. It doesn't say that, I've spent X amount on food, Y on something else, for example. It's just, I see what I've done in the past week, past month, whatever it might be. And then I have to sort of work out myself, so roughly I'm spending about this much on it. And I just thought it was interesting because I wanted to see if you're in the same boat or if you actually use a financial tracker of some sort. And again, while I said this isn't revolutionary, it's not something completely new. With those stats provided from KPMG, it was extremely timely. So I wanted to see if you agreed that it would also have quite a big impact now as more people are trying to save more money. And, over the past year, we've spoken about the cost of living crisis and how expensive things are really getting. Financial management is an absolute must have right now. People need to be aware of how to manage their finances better. So how impactful do you think this is really going to be? If at all, it might be that you don't think it is, do you use a tracker of any kind?
I don't, maybe not the best idea, but I don't use a tracker at least like regularly. I have used them in the past just to kind of get a quick overview of my finances and where I spend money. And, that I think I forget which tracker app it was, but you linked it obviously to your bank account, and it broke everything down into different categories and different brands. And I realized like the local co-op that I live near, it was like, you've spent in the last 3 years like £3,000 at this co-op. And then that was like for me to be like, okay, I need to take a step back and be a bit more careful about, planning where I spend my money, where I'm going to get my meals, and not just, oh, I haven't got anything in, let me run down to the co-op and spend an extortionate amount of money on whatever food they've got in there. So I think they really can be impactful. Like you said, it's a really timely kind of announcement. Obviously, these types of things, trackers do exist, and they have existed for years and years now. But obviously, the more time goes along, the more accurate they're going to be. And if Cheddar's claim that it's going to be 98% accurate is correct, and that's a huge help. Obviously, I'm sure even when I've used them in the past, that you open the app and you see, oh, there are some things that are under food or entertainment that really shouldn't be, and that kind of accuracy can only be helpful for people to better understand their money and to better track how they're spending their income. But I don't know, in terms of this specific example, I'm not 100% sure if this is, revolutionary. As I said, there are a lot of other tracker apps about, and I've used some before that, break down in really great depth different categories. They show you all your subscriptions, all your direct debits that are coming out. They tell you when they come out, and they give you so much information. And I think that in order to compete, you really have to at least match that. If not, you're bringing more to the table. But it's a good start, and I think Cheddar's an app that's slowly growing. We've heard a few news and announcements from Cheddar itself in the last, say, 3 to 6 months, and I think they're a fintech that are slowly gaining a bit of a reputation. They're trying to build out their offerings more and more. So I certainly don't expect this to be the last thing we hear from them, and I'm sure in due course we'll hear more about how they're expanding this offering as well as bringing in new offerings as well. So yeah, I think it's a good start. I certainly don't think it's the revolutionary news that's going to save people from the cost of living crisis, but I think it's good to point out just the value that you can get from spending trackers. And yeah, overall, I think it's a positive move, and hopefully we see more from it in the future.
Yeah, absolutely. I completely agree. I don't think it's something that we've never seen before, and that's going to completely change the way that people approach financial management and sort of planning. But I suppose that's another part that should be mentioned as well, is that in addition to sort of reviewing finances and sort of looking at the spending tracker and seeing where you've spent some money, Cheddar also offers a sort of a financial planning solution which enables users to allocate funds to upcoming purchases with a prepaid format that helps them maintain budgets. And I think when you merge that with spending, or the spending tracker, I should say, you can really sort of not only work using the power of hindsight, being like, oh, well, I've spent money here, and therefore I've now got to be prepared that, I can't spend that 50 quid somewhere else this upcoming month. Instead, you can automatically put that money aside. And I really do think that will help in terms of, allowing users to almost have more financial freedom, because they're not going to be living in fear that they're not going to be able to afford something because they've already got it all planned out. But yeah, I don't think it's anything revolutionary. It's nothing that we've never seen before. But at the same time, I do think it does come at an interesting time. And like you said, it'll be interesting to see what they offer in the future as well. But yeah, with that, why don't we go over to your article?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think this sort of story that I'm bringing to the table this week is kind of related in the sense of it's all about not necessarily tracking your spending, but financial education. And obviously, the more you understand your finances, the better off you're going to be when it comes to managing it and planning for the future. And as I said in the beginning, it's all about a new study from eToro, which basically found that 67% of UAE-based retail investors are currently satisfied with the financial education resources that they are available to them now, which actually was higher than I initially expected. But the investment platform basically revealed a desire for more comprehensive financial education. And as I said at the beginning, eToro looked into who these investors believe should be offering greater financial education. and basically found that 47% expect financial entities such as banks and investment platforms to take the lead on financial education, which was more than any other category. But the ones in the sort of following that were 45% believe it's responsibility of the individual, 41% believe it's the responsibility of universities, 32% schools, 31% the media, and 30% say family. And these came as a bit of a surprise to me. I think it's not surprising that people think banks and investment platforms should be offering the most financial education. But I did expect schools to be a little bit higher up on the sort of rankings, especially because the data also revealed that 87% of respondents wish they had received financial education in school, pointing to a potential shortfall in early financial literacy. And I think, it just shows that there is a lot of progress to be made, not only in the UK, which we talk about a lot on this podcast, but also in the UAE and the Middle East and probably across the globe, is that schools do need to improve the financial education that they offer. And it's something we hear about all the time, especially when we talk about UK politics. And it's clear that there's a need for that everywhere. And I think that's just a really important point to bring to the light, basically, because I think it's something that could have a huge impact on global financial education and planning. And I think we're at a stage, especially when cost of living crisis isn't just a thing that's in the UK. Cost of living is rising across the globe, and we've seen that wages aren't really matching up, and it means people are having to do more of their money and really taking way more care of it. But when eToro looked at where people are getting their financial education from, unsurprisingly, it found that social media platforms currently sit at the forefront of people's minds when they're gathering information for investment decisions. In fact, 40% of respondents use them as their primary source, followed by Google searches at 34% and financial courses at 33%. So, with this in mind, I really wanted to get your opinion, Francis, on just the whole story. What do you take from this? Is there any sort of specific aspects that really surprise you? And what do you think the solution is when it comes to, the responsibility of financial education? Should it be a shared responsibility among banks, schools, individuals, families? Or, do you think someone harbors that responsibility any more than others? And, do you think schools is the way to go? Or do you think there is another sort of priority that we should be looking at first?
Yeah, that's a really interesting point and question that you raised there, because when I initially saw this article and those stats that you read out at the start about who people are holding most responsible, understandably, I agree. I think banks and other financial institutions do hold the most responsibility to really sort of make sure their customers are aware of all the services that they're offering, how they can be best used. And to be honest, I found it quite surprising that it was so close. I think it was only 47% felt that financial entities were the ones that needed to provide education, whereas 45% felt that it was the individual, that should really be sort of going out and trying to find this education themselves. And in my opinion, it seemed, I don't know, I feel like perhaps while there is definitely some input and effort that needs to be made by individuals to make sure they are financially aware of things, I think there is a bigger burden on financial institutions themselves. And I think it was a really interesting point that you raised, that schools are so low down on the list as well, because we constantly hear about how finances and just the correct way to spend money, I suppose, how that is always such a big topic in schools nowadays, especially in the UK. But I assumed that this would be the same worldwide, and perhaps it should be the same worldwide, because I think the earlier that people are aware on how to really manage money and be aware of different services that are out there for them, that can only be a good thing, I think. And it was just interesting to see as well why different retail investors in the UAE were really looking to sort of be in that space. And it was because they want to achieve financial independence, long-term security, and generate capital for future expenses such as mortgages and schooling. And again, these are things that I feel like if you were to address in a school, perhaps people would go about it differently. They might not look at sort of these sort of investments as the best way to do it. Perhaps they might still, but I feel like they would be more aware rather than perhaps word of mouth of somebody else's experience saying, this worked out really well for me, you should really risk your funds perhaps. I mean, not every investment is necessarily, you don't need to look at it that way, that I'm risking my funds right now. But, there is that idea of perhaps if there was greater education at a younger level, people wouldn't be as concerned really on how to achieve these long-term goals of financial independence and sort of mortgages and stuff like that. So yeah, in short, an answer to your question, I think it's surprising that schools aren't higher up on the list, but it doesn't surprise me that even though it is only just, financial institutions and banks are the ones that are being held most responsible for education.
Yeah, I think you raised a really good point there, especially when talking about sort of the role of the individual. And I think it's all fine to say, we think individuals should hold themselves more responsible to educate themselves about their finances. But at the end of the day, if the resources aren't there to do that and you don't know where to look, it's a really difficult space. And obviously
well, not only that as well, but if you're looking on social media, it might not be the most reliable source of information as well. There's nothing to sort of give it that credibility.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's a great point as well, is, people do feel like they have to look to social media because that's the sort of only avenue that they see, okay, this is where I can get some kind of information. I can also get other people's opinions about investments and things like that. So while it might not necessarily be the most reliable information, and obviously you do get a lot of misinformation on these platforms, I think there has to be an onus on these other institutions, specifically, these investment platforms or banks, because they're the ones that you're sort of dealing all your money with. And especially as, the likes of eToro make investments even easier to access, I think there needs to be the resources on the same platforms to better understand how you're putting your money in and what's going to happen to it, the risk associated. And to be fair, I think eToro is one of the platforms that do a really good job of that. But I think you can't go wrong with offering even more resources and even more information about these types of things. And I think there's just obviously a huge gap between what people need and what's actually available to them at the moment. And I think it'll be interesting to see how that evolves over time as firms like eToro do try and sort of take the onus and understand that we need to make changes. And hopefully there'll be positive ones that sort of ripple across the entire industry. But with that in mind, I think we've wrapped up both those news stories very nicely indeed. Obviously, if you're interested in either of the articles that we've been exploring today, or you want to find out any more fintech insights, you can check out the fintechtimes.com, where we're always posting, we're always active, and there's new news and insights every single day. And that brings us on to what I learned this week. So every week, so much news and insights crosses our desks, and we like to pick something that we find especially interesting to share with our listeners. So kicking us off, Francis, what have you learned this week?
So this week I learned that Now Money has made 2 new big collaborations in its mission to become more financially inclusive. It has partnered with the Commercial Bank International to enable Now Money to deliver efficient, secure and comprehensive banking solutions to its users through its banking infrastructure. And it has also partnered with Network International, which will enable Now Money to offer faster, more reliable and secure transactions through its payments solutions. So yeah, just thought it was a quite cool partnership.
Fantastic. And this week I found out that 91% of US small businesses face significant cash flow problems driven largely by rising labor costs and late payments. And that comes from the Cash Flow Compass report, which we covered on the Fintech Times website. And with that in mind, that wraps up this week's episode. I think we've done a very good job without Polly, but hopefully she's back here to lead us next week. And I'll see you next week.
Yeah, see you next week.
Thanks for listening to the Fintech Times News and Views podcast. Don't miss next week's episode and continue the conversation using #TFT News and Views and follow us at the Fintech Times.